3 years on from Fallout 4, we have Fallout 76, where a bunch of changes have been made to accommodate the move to network play, but it's fair to say a lot of things have stayed the same as Fallout 4. And to join me to talk about what's happened in the interim is John Lindemann.
Tom, well, I'm looking at Fallout 76 running, and I think there's going to be some interesting things to talk about on this video. I guess we should probably get the basics out of the way, because, that's one of the things people come for. So tell me, what resolutions are we looking at here across the board?
Alright, so if you played the beta, you'll be kind of familiar with what we're going through here. It's dynamic 1080p on base Xbox One. It runs with a kind of scale on the horizontal axis only, so that goes down to a minimum of 1440 by 1080, which makes it about 75% of a proper 1080p.
Oh, that's great for marketing as well, since you can say that it's 1080p.
Yeah, it's true. Well, it is, one way to swing it. It is dynamic 1080p on Xbox One, markedly blurrier than base PS4, which is next, I guess, and that is more doggedly set to 1920 by 1080. I haven't found any major drops from that, but it is a potential there. Next along, let's go for Ps4 Pro. That is 2560 by 1440, again with the potential for being dynamic, and Xbox One X 4K. And again, there's a chance it can go down, but for the most part, I've seen just a 3840 by 2160 image in most of gameplay. So that's how it breaks down.
It sounds like dynamic resolution is a possibility, but in general, you can expect pretty much those resolutions, which is great. We'll be curious to see how this holds up in performance, but I've been looking at some of the game and some of the footage you've shared with me, and it is interesting to look at because this is a direct evolution of what was done in Fallout 4 visually. Sometimes it actually looks great, and other times, especially in some of the interiors, it really looks ancient. So it's a huge mixed bag, but I will say that I do like seeing these new environments with the more lush greenery, and it ends up looking like a weird combination between Skyrim and Fallout 4 in a way. Yeah, it's a really weird looking thing. I don't think you can really draw too many conclusions about what Bethesda's doing next though. This is very clearly just like, let's follow up with the type of work we've done on Fallout 4 and go from there.
Fallout 4 was built with purely single player in mind, but I had heard that there was a multiplayer mode designed for it, and that eventually they came to the conclusion that they should actually break it out into its own thing. And that's what Fallout 76 is, really. It is an offshoot with online multiplayer in mind, and they've basically taken the creation engine and all the pros and cons that were obvious back then. The real thing that stood out to me when we first reviewed Fallout 4 was that they got the volumetric lighting down. That looked great.
Yeah, that does look really good, yeah.
I mean, it's the highlight. I mean, anyone who plays it will walk through forests during the light of day and see this beautiful effect, light shafts flitting between leaves. Always a crowd pleaser. I love it. But then, as you say, you go to interiors where you'd presume that things would be a bit less taxing on the engine.
It's a confusing thing because, they switched to PBR materials, which is nice, and honestly, the modeling quality of the interiors is perfectly acceptable for this type of game, but the way their lighting seems to work in this engine and the way it's been applied to the art and, the look of the game, it just doesn't work. I mean, it's missing a lot of like the contact shadows, and it just feels really kind of bland and flat. It doesn't look like you would expect from a 2018 game from a large studio.
No. And that pretty much goes across all four platforms, I think. I recall Fallout 4 had extended draw distances on Xbox One X and PS4 Pro. We can presume it works the same way, but it's nothing obvious. I mean, I'm showing comparison shots here, and yeah, there's not much between them in the mid to long distance as we walk down that initial area, so it must be reserved for the extremely far distant stuff. And all the rest, ambient occlusion quality, very similar between all four. There is a difference in volumetric lighting quality, which was always a taxing setting on PC. You get something a bit better on X and to a lesser degree Pro. But for the rest of it, the textures and all the settings are a match across all systems.
Obviously for this to really matter, the game needs to play smoothly. And we know very well that Fallout 4 launched with a lot of issues, but I think in its current state, from what we've seen, Fallout 4 is actually fairly reasonable now, especially on the Pro and the X. Not perfect, but quite playable.
So there were select areas, weren't there, which we dipped in and out of as like stress tests. Corvega Factory was a classic. I'm sort of working my way towards a couple in Fallout 76. Huge sprawl of a game. I mean, it's many times the size of the Fallout 4 map. I did find one spot actually where I thought, oh, this could be it. So I was playing on the base PS4, and it was in a co-op game, and we had to go up to basically a communications tower. It's one of the highest points in the game. Great view of all the surrounding scenery, sort of a locked 20 FPS for a good minute stretch, let's say, with dips to 15 FPS in this spot. It wouldn't be representative to say this is how the whole game runs. Of course it isn't. But the fact that this can happen, and for such long stretches, you know, is extreme, and it's quite a shock when it happens.
Yeah, this seems to be the thing, right? Is the game just generally isn't consistent enough, where even when you're kind of hitting around 30 FPS, there still seems to be plenty of little stutters and hitches and things that kind of subtract from the fluidity. But then you run into these sections like this where it just randomly tanks performance hard, and you're just stuck at 20 FPS for an extended period of time. And that's not great, but you can't necessarily rely on this across all the platforms. Like, you talked about PS4 hitting 20 FPS, but you went there on the Pro, didn't you?
Yeah, Pro, and even base Xbox One and X. I just thought, surely one of these consoles will have similar symptoms. You'd suspect the base Xbox One especially would have that. So Pro, I went up the same route. Not much happening. It's just 30 FPS. Mostly there are drops here and there, stutters, which are part of the course, which we'll go into later. But yeah, not a problem on Pro, and even base Xbox One, which I thought going into it would probably have a similar problem. Nothing to the same level as base PS4, where we had, you know, a flat 20 FPS line. Here it's just a few drops here and there. Obviously, we go into the Xbox One X version thinking it's going to clear all of this up, much like the Pro did, but in actual fact it's the complete opposite, and we've got perhaps the worst reading of them all in this area. So that goes down to 15 and even down to almost the 10 FPS line, which really takes you by surprise and shows just how variable the frame rate can be between all four formats. Yeah, very strange. There's, you know, scenarios like this across every platform where there'll be an issue on one but not the others. So I was playing in co-op with a friend, and we were taking down a bunch of enemies in a group as part of an event, and this was tanking the PS4 Pro. We had the exact same view, but the PS4 Pro was firing away this with a sort of fire augmentation on the gun. We're seeing the same effect, but it's absolutely dropping it to 20 FPS, major frame time spikes. But on the base PS4, some dips here and there. So again, you know, the kind of approach to testing here just doesn't work out, or it could just be the case that the engine is so variable and there's so much going on server side with the networking that it's hard to get an exact read on, you know, how the four consoles compare.
Yeah, exactly. It's difficult to say for certain, like, what is like GPU, CPU, or networking related at this point. Like, where is the bottleneck? We've not seen multiplayer in this engine before, for instance. That's a new thing, so it's not always certain like where the problem is stemming from, and it's super weird that you're looking at the same thing and one console was dipping so hard while the other one is fine, and then you go to another scene and it's the inverse, and that just sort of seems to be the general experience that we've seen here.
Yeah, but I'd like to stress that 30 FPS is kind of the mainstay. The problem with this engine has always been, through Skyrim and Fallout 4, the stutters. So 30 FPS, accept that as the kind of regular rate of play across every platform, but there are still stutters which kind of take you out of the gameplay for about a good half to a full second. Massive spikes, just as you're running through woodlands or whatever, especially approaching areas you've not been to before. Will they'll give you a prompt or an achievement? It just seems to send the engine into overdrive and then it clears up. Yeah, it is a bit rickety, it's fair to say.
I would say that we kind of expected this, to be honest. I mean, trying to take this game online in this way after the problems that Fallout 4 exhibited, not too surprising, especially when even Bethesda itself puts out that note sometime back, basically kind of suggesting like, yeah, this game's going to have some problems. But we haven't discussed that aspect yet. So performance isn't great, visuals are okay most of the time, and the resolution's fine, but what about glitches? Did you run into anything that seemed a little weird? Because I saw a few screenshots from you suggesting that things weren't always great, but how's that panned out overall?
So I've seen stuff like enemies and terrain where the textures are kind of half-loaded, low-quality mapping, which clearly waiting for something better to pop in. Or in the case of some enemies, just like they're completely textureless, and then eventually that texture pops in. Then there's stuff like the animation, which has rarely been a strong point of Bethesda's games. They're very sort of scripted. And in this case, I've seen enemies just sort of stopping in their tracks and basically frozen in place, and you can just walk around them. Like, it can affect gameplay as well. I was in a party of 2 and we'd set up a mission, basically an escort mission across the map. It was a long stretch and we had to follow this character all the way through, basically hoping it never got caught on geometry as it went. And eventually it did, and we were just sat there in a river waiting for it to fix itself and get away from the side of a ridge. Eventually it did, but it was a good like 2 minutes. We were just sat there waiting, thinking we have no control over this. It's all down to the AI getting itself unstuck. Yeah, so things like that are apt to happen. This is definitely a problem, and those are code red issues that they have to fix.
As an online game, I think we have to imagine that they will probably continue to evolve with it, continue to update it, and, you know, hopefully improve the experience for everyone over time.
Yeah, this is a studio with big dreams, but not the technology to match it, I don't think. Or at least the engine isn't in the right place to do so. So hopefully, next generation, they'll have turned up with a complete overhaul maybe, or certainly a substantial change to make things a bit easier. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me, John.
But of course, Tom.
And if you did enjoy or appreciate the work we do at Digital Foundry, please feel free to like or subscribe to this video and hit the bell to get notifications as any video lands. We have this video on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly with me or John, just use Twitter. But from the both of us, thanks for watching.